Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for this. We were really excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ben. I'm excited to be here.
So in prepping for this, it's this very, very wonderful rabbit hole of metabolic health. And to you, that probably seems very common. You don't think about what metabolic health means. But to somebody who hasn't heard of what metabolic health is, how would you describe what metabolic health is?
Yeah, I mean, every function in our body relies on our metabolism. So it really is. So obviously metabolic means metabolism. And that means like our ability to use fuels at appropriate times, at appropriate situations, and our ability to switch fuels and basically like bring balance to our body through cellular metabolism, depending on what our body needs at that time. And the health of that, so the ability to respond appropriately, will dictate like the levels of blood lipids found in our blood, our glucose levels, etc. And all of that kind of encompasses metabolic health. So metabolic health is this like vague term, and there's so many different markers. It's not just the absence of metabolic disease, which is honestly sometimes found in the literature. But health should be something beyond just the absence of disease. It should be what we're striving for like optimal levels. But within that framework if we're going to think about metabolic disease and metabolic syndrome, for example, which is a constellation of 5 metrics being high blood pressure, high triglycerides, low HDL, elevated waist circumference, and I can't remember that. I think it might be fasting glucose. But those are basically metrics of our metabolic health and something we can track over time and assess and figure out if the lifestyle that we're living is putting us on the trajectory towards better metabolic health or putting us back towards sickness, essentially. But within, yeah, like I said, like there's different markers of metabolic health that we can add into just those 5. But it really is this like vague term, but we have markers that we can track and be able to assess our metabolic health.
So, I mean, I love the point you made about it's not just the absence of disease, which I think most people feel like, well, I'm without disease, I'm healthy, I'm fine. But where does the difference between average and optimal metabolic health, can you talk us through the differences between maybe from the sort of biomarker perspective, or what does that look like?
I mean, I wouldn't give you any actual values, but I think of it just like the trajectory, like I said. I actually love the CrossFit. I can't remember what it's called, but it is this like spectrum of which way are you heading? Are you going towards sickness or are you going towards health? And our daily actions are dictating which way we're going. As small, like just our daily habits, which is kind of crazy because all these little things, it's just like over time, it's accumulating and pushing us towards one direction. And so when we're thinking about like, okay, am I in good metabolic health? Am I average? Am I like, where am I going? I always think of like, where is the trajectory going? And that's that's where you want to intervene and be like, okay, well, if I'm improving, I'm doing something good. If I'm going in the opposite direction, then something needs to change on a daily basis. Like your daily habits and your routine need to change. I'm not answering your question directly because I'm not going to be able to pull off. I can't remember like the reference ranges for what we're actually trying to optimize certain waist circumference or blood pressure levels. But I think of metabolic health as this trajectory and something that we should be tracking. So we should know if our lifestyle is promoting better health or if it's not. And I think just being able to see which direction you're heading in is a way to think of to assess whether you're going, if what you're doing is proper or not.
Exactly. I mean, there's a way to answer than giving me some metrics or things. I like because it's a really easy framework to try and understand where you're either heading towards the Titanic iceberg or you're giving it a clear miss, and you're fine. You're good to keep up the right things. Last one on metabolic health, just as like a broader thing to frame the discussion. What are the common misconceptions when people think about metabolic health?
Ooh, I don't know. Misconceptions as in terms of metabolic health, I'm not sure. Misconceptions about ways to improve metabolic health. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about potentially just based on like what we kind of take for granted as messages on social media. Not take for granted, but think that like is common sense. Often, I guess even just to backtrack even more, just my experience going from science communication, more social media into actual hardcore academia, has been very humbling to realize that a lot of what we are shown and a lot of what's portrayed on social media isn't always as simple. Like, we think of these like processes and protocols and things like that as like these simple messages, but in physiology it's often not that simple, and there's often just a ton of different ways to achieve a certain outcome, and things that make sense, like a storyline in physiology that makes sense, isn't often also how physiology works, and it's really hard to communicate that, one, and two, it's often hard to like wrap your head around, because you want that simple story, like, oh, fasting makes you burn fat, so you should be improving your metabolic flexibility because now you're upregulating fat oxidation. But what is a response isn't often, or not often, isn't always an adaptation, and those things are different. So what a response to something is not always going to be promoting an adaptation in that process. And I think that's been a huge learning thing for me to understand, because like even when it comes to ketogenic diets, low carb diets, fasting, fasted exercise, zone 2 exercise, all these things are promoting this shift into utilizing more fats for fuel. And that even alone, that one sentence, fats for fuel, sounds good. Like, it sounds like this is promoting fat adaptation and improving our ability to oxidize fats. And it might be, I'm not saying it's not, except for the fact that it's just not that simple, because we know other things that don't burn fats also promote fat adaptation. So I think that there's just a lot of complexity to physiology that is lost through simple messages. So perhaps that kind of answers your question on misconceptions. I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's a wonderful answer, and actually it resonates, because I think when I started like my health journey, whatever you want to call it, you know, I know you came across Tom D'Agostino's podcast on Joe Rogan originally, right? And that seemed to be like a seed of your career. I remember listening to that same one and really going deep on this rabbit hole, probably not as deep as you, and then adopting these things as absolutes and being not very flexible in my own thinking. So, I would fast 24 hours every single day and think that's fine and good to do. And then, you get a blood test and your cortisol is probably high. I'm like, oh, shit, something's going wrong here. And I used to do it in absolutes more. And now, actually, as I get into it and do this podcast more and speak to smarter people like yourself and all these wonderful people, I feel like there's less and less absolutes and just more complexity, which needs to be appreciated. And you can't just tell something on Instagram as the world. Too many people have a platform these days and an opinion. And I think this podcast, there's no opinions from our side. It's actually just trying to give people who've done the work a voice. But
right. And it's not discounting any of those things that I mentioned, like fasting, ketogenic diets, fast exercise, etc. It's not taking away from them. It's just acknowledging that there's many ways to skin a cat. And I think that's what has made me like kind of step back from knowing like, okay, well, what is my message, or like, what am I trying to communicate? Because it's very difficult to communicate a bunch of different things that are leading to one outcome that we're all trying to achieve. It's much simpler to be like, do this and you'll get that. But there's many, many ways to achieve health. And I think that needs to be more appreciated. And I think it would reduce the amount of, I don't know, shame, judgment, etc. around what other people do. Because if something works for someone and someone's doing the opposite thing and also seemingly in good health, then it's kind of confusing, because you're like, well, this person's following a vegan diet, but I'm following a carnivore diet, and we're both apparently like performing well and have vibrant lifestyles and are in good health. And it's like, wait, what? How are we both achieving this? And I think that's where it gets a bit like, it's hard psychologically to understand. But I do think that there is just many ways to achieve health.
I agree, and this podcast is continuously yeah, you can't all be open-minded. You're talking to someone whose worldview clashes with yours. So, okay, well, forced to be open-minded, actually, maybe I was wrong, or just you constantly update your worldview, which is wonderful. And you're
Right.
really interesting because you're very deep in the theory of everything, but you're actually a practitioner of all this stuff as well, right? You practice what you preach. So it's I think a good place to dive into conversation is why you do what you do. And I think the why behind behaviors when it comes to health, we not all say it for people, right? As opposed to say high intensity exercise. Like, why do you do high intensity exercise? So I know you do lots of CrossFit stuff, lots of metal metcons, which is, I guess, very high intensity workouts for those who are familiar. Why do you do high intensity exercise?
Well, one, I enjoy it. So I think people gravitate towards the things that they enjoy. And when it comes to exercise, I think finding something that you love and are willing to do is the most important thing, because we just all need to move our bodies on as regular basis as we can. So specifically, like, why do I do high intensity exercise? One, I'm bought in on the science of high intensity exercise. So I think that pushing intensity is important for promoting the adaptations that we're trying to get from exercise in a time efficient manner. Lately, I guess I've been working at, or my training volume has definitely gone up, but prior to, I guess, the summer, like, I was working out 20 minutes a day pretty much. And I was happy with my body composition. I'm happy with how I feel, etc. Like, I feel like that was a good amount of training each day. And it's amazing what you can get done in 20 minutes. So I think from that perspective of the time efficient, from a time perspective, high intensity exercise is superior for sure. There's also literature that would suggest that high intensity exercise is superior to moderate intensity continuous exercise for promoting mitochondrial adaptations, improvements in VO2 max, which is one of our strongest predictors of longevity and cardiovascular disease related risk reduction. And yeah, I like to challenge myself. Like, CrossFit specifically, I don't really love high intensity exercise in terms of like, okay, I'm going to do intervals on a stationary bike, which sadly is what I make my participants do in my research. However, I like the functional fitness aspect of it because, one, it's distracting because you're constantly switching movements and the workout goes by really fast. Two, you improve strength at the same time, which I'm a big proponent of resistance training as well. I think we need to increase our muscle mass as another marker of longevity. So not only just having muscle mass, but having functional, healthy muscle mass is very important for reducing the risk of disease and just living a long and healthy, independent life. So I kind of mix those two together, and that's what CrossFit is. It is high intensity functional training. So you're utilizing weight training, but doing it at higher speeds and intensity. But I do think intensity is just important for promoting adaptation. And yeah, I'm bought in on the science, and it's what I enjoy.
Love it. I mean, there's so many different ways you could get bought in on exercise, right? And specifically CrossFit, I guess. I mean, the communal aspect of CrossFit is wonderful. I used to do the competing CrossFit, last sort of, I guess, maybe 5-6 years ago. It was so fun. I love the communal aspects of it. I loved I guess your juggle between cardio and weights, all this kind of stuff. But it feels differently mentally after a CrossFit workout. It feels like it's not just like doing rowing intervals and it's hard. But I don't know, it lights my brain up for some reason. I don't know if that's the lactate. Who knows? But it feels good. When you're talking about adaptation,
yeah, there's something about like collapsing on the floor that is the most rewarding part of a workout.
Yeah, actually, I think the methodology of you can see your body of work you've got to do, and you know when it ends, and so you don't have to hold anything back, right?
Right.
That framework seems to be nice mentally, but when it comes to those adaptations, specifically the mitochondrial adaptations, why?
Mm-hmm.
Why higher intensity versus zone 2 from a mitochondrial perspective?
So the way that our mitochondria adapt to exercise is by sensing energetic stress. So our muscles need ATP for continual contractions. And the faster we use that ATP, so the more intense we work out, the faster we need ATP to be regenerated to keep our contractions going. And as that speed and intensity increases, we start accumulating what's called AMP and ADP because we're using ATP. So that's the tri. So now we're reducing that to AMP, mono, and ADP. And those AMP and ADP molecules are sensed by a protein within our cells called AMPK. AMPK is an upstream kinase of several adaptations and something we want increased in activity in our skeletal muscle so that it can start activating proteins. One of these proteins, which is termed the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis, meaning biogenesis just being the creation of new mitochondria, or just the growth of our mitochondrial reticulum. So just increasing the size and content of our mitochondria, which is what we want when we're exercising. We want to promote mitochondrial adaptation. But it really starts from, that energetic stress and basically telling our cells that we better start increasing our energy production sites so that next time we exercise, we're able to handle that intensity of exercise and we're not exceeding our capacity. So we need to exceed the capacity of our mitochondria in order to promote those adaptations, similar to resistance training. You're not going to, you can get stronger lifting low weights, but you'd have to do a lot of reps, or you can do lower reps and higher weights. But we need to essentially give that struggle sense, like that message to our muscles, whether it's our mitochondria or just straight up muscle protein synthesis. We need to tell our muscles to adapt. And in order to do that, we have to exceed its capacity, or else it's not going to know, like, okay, well, next time, if you're not exceeding the next exercise bout, you're not giving it that signal to tell it that, oh, we need to be bigger, better, stronger. So that message is really important, and we get that by exceeding our capacity. And so when you brought up zone 2 training there, comparing it, and zone 2 training is deliberately below the intensity that would cause the accumulation of these metabolic byproducts that promote adaptation. So AMP and ADP are not the only signals. We have other signals as well. So even just glycogen depletion is linked to the activation of AMPK as well. We, of course, burn more glycogen at higher intensities than lower intensities. And again, zone 2 is like deliberately an intensity that's supposed to be sparing muscle glycogen because we're essentially utilizing that max fat oxidation, that zone that we would be burning a lot of fat. Or mostly fat, so proportionately. Although I believe we're still burning high proportions of fat even when we're exceeding zone 2. And we're also burning glycogen in zone 2, which I didn't realize until I started really digging into any of the lactate threshold literature, but we are depleting glycogen even in zone 2. But anyways, the point is that we have to send those signals to our mitochondria to adapt and become bigger, better, stronger. And we only do that by exceeding its capacity. And actually, that's a misnomer too, because exceeding its capacity, our mitochondria, the capacity of our mitochondria is probably far beyond what we are even doing. We have the capacity. But zone 2 is higher intensity. Working out above zone 2 is going to increase the activation of those pathways more than zone 2 does. So I think there's a good rationale.
Yes. Okay. So is that because, you mentioned ATP, so high intensity exercise, ATP is a fuel, wrong, and I've heard you right, it's the fuel we use for high intensity exercise. And downstream of that is sort of more mitochondrial demand, or is needed. And that's the way you can, I guess, optimize that pathway mitochondria, and that is more efficient than those who we are not using as much ATP. Is that right?
Right. So we're always So our muscles just need ATP for contraction, and we're always trying to resynthesize it. And we can do that through oxidative metabolism, relying on our mitochondria. But eventually, if we're so our mitochondria are resynthesizing ATP at the rate that we're using ATP in zone 2 for the most part. So we're never getting the accumulation of any byproducts because we're just taking those AMPs and ADP and then making more ATP through oxidative metabolism with our mitochondria. But at some point, if we're increasing intensity, at some point, we're going to exceed the capacity of our mitochondria to resynthesize ATP at the rate that we need it. So now we're relying more heavily on glycolysis. So we're now resynthesizing ATP by using glucose metabolism outside of the mitochondria in the cytosol. And then that's when we start getting the accumulation of lactate, for example. So
Okay.
we can look at lactate as a marker of our intensity as well, which is lactate's used to determine zone 2. Your zone 2 is a little just below 2 millimolars of lactate would be considered your zone 2, or how it's discussed on social media at least.
Okay, so what kind of workout would be the most optimal? Like if you have a spectrum, everyone knows what zone 2 would look like, and then you have some lactate in the middle. What would be a very high demanding a workout of ATP?
What would be a demand? Anything that's, I don't know, making you want to stop.
Like,
Anything you feel like you cannot continue for a long time.
that's good. That's pretty clear. So you mentioned another way to stimulate mitochondria is glycogen depletion. How does that relate to, I guess, sound mitochondria or optimal mitochondria when it comes to fasted workouts?
Yeah, it's interesting because we actually don't use different, like the rates of glycogen depletion in the fasted and the fed state are actually the same, if not more rapid in the, like sometimes if you feed carbohydrates, you're triggering glycolysis, and now you're relying more heavily on glucose metabolism, which could deplete glycogen. It's a bit confusing. I'm trying to just like remember what the literature shows. But I do know that carbohydrate feeding doesn't change the rates of glycogen depletion at a whole muscle level. There is some literature showing that we get greater glycogen depletion in type 2 muscle fibers in the fasted state than in the fed state. And that might trigger some fiber type specific adaptations. But for the most part, carbohydrate feeding versus fasted exercise is really just sparing liver glycogen. So we're just essentially, so in the fasted state, we're going to be relying on liver glycogen to maintain our blood glucose levels, because we're always trying to keep blood glucose levels in a healthy range to make sure that our brain is getting enough fuel, even though our muscles are soaking in glucose really fast. So the rate, like the flux is increasing rapidly when we start exercising, because our muscles are essentially a sink for glucose, and we're pulling glucose from our bloodstream. And our liver, if we're fasted, so we're not taking in any glucose, our liver's going to have to make sure that it's spitting out enough glucose to keep our blood glucose in a healthy range at the rate that our muscles are now stealing it from our blood. But if you're in the carbohydrate fed state, or if you're consuming carbohydrates during exercise, so say you're on a long bike ride and now you're sipping on a Gatorade or taking in some gel or something like that, you're taking that load off your liver and putting glucose into our bloodstream without having to deplete liver glycogen as much. So I think of fasted versus fed exercise as really just not necessarily changing the rates of muscle glycogen utilization as much as it is just sparing liver glycogen. And then it also depends on intensity. So if we're fasted versus carbohydrate fed and we're working out at high intensities, if you eat carbohydrates before a high intensity exercise bout, your blood glucose actually might drop during exercise, whereas in the fasted state, your glucose will actually spike up. So that's just because when we're eating carbohydrates before a bout of high intensity exercise, we now have elevated insulin, which is going to shut down lipolysis. It's going to tell our muscles to soak up, to take in glucose, and we're going to shut down hepatic liver glycogen or liver glucose output. So now we're not putting glucose into our bloodstream, because why would we? We just ate carbohydrates. Those exogenous carbohydrates are going to put glucose into our bloodstream. And then we superimpose that with exercise and something like high intensity exercise, which rapidly is going to start taking glucose into our muscles from our bloodstream. And then we suddenly see a drop in blood glucose because of the suppression of hepatic glucose output, the high insulin. Like, we might be opening up more doors to our muscles because we have non-insulin dependent glucose uptake on top of insulin dependent glucose uptake. So there's just a few different factors that are essentially leading to a drop in blood glucose. Whereas if you're going to do a high intensity bout in the fasted state where insulin's low, and hepatic glucose output should be high, because that's where your blood glucose is being maintained and that's the source of glucose in the fasted state. And now you exercise and you're increasing catecholamines and you're telling your liver that, oh crap, like your glucose is rapidly being taken into your muscles from your bloodstream. We better spit out a lot of glucose into your bloodstream. And you might see a rise in glucose from high intensity exercise. But they're different depending on if you're in the fed and fasted state. So I don't even remember your initial question, but there's some physiology for you.
Okay, so knowing the science and knowing the differences between exercise in a fasted state versus a non-fasted state, how does your own, I guess, nutritional regime look in comparison to your training? Do you like to work out fasted? Do you make sure you eat them? Like, what does that look like for you specifically?
Yeah, I exercise fasted, just like personal preference. I like to work out in the morning. I really actually I try to stay unbiased and like trying to figure out like, is this placebo? What, like, psychologically? But I genuinely just do not like working out with any food in my stomach. So that is my personal preference. I'm not necessarily doing it to be like, oh, I'm optimizing my adaptations. This is just what I prefer. It works with my routine, etc. It's how I feel best. But I do think that there are rationales, and you could use, there's enough scientific literature to support the use of fasted, at least moderate intensity continuous exercise for potentially promoting potentially greater adaptations. I'm just going to stay very conservative on that because I think that the literature is just a bit inconsistent. And it might depend on your baseline health status. So whether a trained individual is going to get even greater adaptations by training in the fasted state compared to an untrained individual, so someone who might be overweight, potentially insulin resistant. There's some research that would suggest that carbohydrate feeding before exercise in individuals that are trying to exercise to promote health and improve insulin sensitivity, those carbohydrates before exercise might be blunting some of those adaptations that we're trying to get from exercise. So if you want the best bang for your buck, then that might be a strategy by exercising in the fasted state to promote those adaptations, at least for moderate intensity exercise, because there was a high intensity interval training study done in overweight women, and there was no difference in the improvements in insulin sensitivity whether you ate beforehand, and that was with high intensity. So, but in the studies that have been done with moderate intensity, there does seem to be a better bang for your buck if you're going to exercise doing it in the fasted state versus the carbohydrate fed state specifically. But whether that applies to just trained individuals looking for adaptations, I'm not sure. I don't think that the literature is compelling enough for me to be like, yes, we should be training low.
Yes. I feel like that's one of the things that was all the rage at one point. Fasted cardio, you tap into more glycogen and you're pushing yourself. It's great if you're trying to get yourself into ketosis and all this kind of stuff. And I think personal preference is massive with that. Me personally, if I'm doing some sort of CrossFit type thing, I don't want to eat anything. If it's slightly longer, over an hour, I'd like to eat something. Or if it's just lifting weights, I want to eat something before. We speak of different working out and things, or different ways we can work out. I know there's research around muscle quality, and I feel in the UK at least, it's not something anyone's really talking about. Muscle quality versus quantity. Could you walk us through what is muscle quality, and how do we know if we have good muscle quality? How grows good muscle quality, and why is it important?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like metabolic health. It's just like a vague umbrella term for a bunch of different things we could assess that would fall into muscle quality. But we are working on a potential biomarker for muscle quality, which will, honestly, at the rate that research goes, probably won't be published for at least a year. But it's in the works right now. But muscle quality, like, it really does cover the metabolic function of our muscles. So that would be really tied to our mitochondrial function. And then also just our strength. So a great marker of muscle quality is just simply grip strength. So that should essentially capture whole body strength. But strength in general, so leg strength, arm strength, etc., any sort of assessment of your muscle strength will tell us about your muscle quality. But there's all the other markers as well. You could do ultrasounds. So just like looking at the fat infiltration of your muscles. We don't want to have fat accumulating in our muscles. That is definitely a red flag. Unless you're accumulating intramuscular triglycerides right beside your mitochondria because you're just a really elite athlete. And that's one of the adaptations to endurance exercise is increased intramuscular triglycerides. So we want those fat droplets right beside our mitochondria so that we can use them when we need them when we're working out. However, if we're getting fat accumulation, like almost like how you would get fat accumulating around your liver and your organs, so that visceral fat, that is a sign of poor muscle quality because it interferes with signaling. It's associated with increased ceramides and diacylglycerides, so things that are interfering with our ability to respond to insulin. So those are related to insulin sensitivity. But you had Tommy Wood on your podcast previously, and we published a paper together on muscle quality and cognitive function. But essentially, it was interesting because those with higher muscle mass, it wasn't associated with higher levels of physical activity, and it was just that they were overweight. So you could eat your way to increase muscle mass just by virtue of calories and protein, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have good quality muscle. So only looking at muscle mass alone and body comp isn't enough. So I think that we should be looking at those, like, how strong are you? Can you hold your body weight? Can you get up and off a chair? Like, so there's different tests that we use in research as well. Not necessarily my research or my lab, because we don't do a lot of that. But yeah, there's different ways to think about muscle quality, but it should be related to our metabolism, and then it should be related to our strength.
Well, that's a lovely answer. I enjoyed speaking to Tommy. I mean, who wouldn't? He's very so informed and lovely as well. But after I looked at that paper, and it was interesting. Like everyone's met that type. There's nothing wrong with it, but just being heavy and as muscle doesn't necessarily correlate with health, right? I found a YouTube video of you and another, I can't remember her name, but you were talking about a fertility and metabolic health when it comes to a diet around female fertility and how you can foster better fertility and metabolic health. I've already mentioned my partner, she said, make sure you ask Kristi about that because it sounds really interesting. When it comes to female fertility, how are fertility and metabolic health linked, and what can females do to better increase their fertility from a metabolic point of view.
Wow, I'm curious what this YouTube video was. However, yeah, so my sister and I, so my sister's a fertility naturopathic doctor who works in fertility, and we work with patients and to optimize their metabolic health during their fertility treatments. I'll admit I tackle the lifestyle stuff, nutrition and exercise portion of it more than the actual fertility stuff. That's Dr. Bronwyn, who really brings that side of the conversation into it. But it's very clear that our metabolic health is linked to our fertility outcomes. So not only just infertility and our ability to conceive, but our success rates with IVF treatments and different fertility treatments is really linked to our metabolic health. And our metabolic health is so tied to our body composition and our lifestyle. So honestly, all of metabolic diseases and chronic diseases are tightly linked to just, are we exercising? What's our body composition? And then we know what we can do to change those things. So regardless of the metabolic disease or the metabolic dysfunction that we're trying to tweak and improve, diet and exercise is always going to be, in my mind, that should be standard of care and first line care, and something that we can change through just our daily routine. But when it comes to fertility, so insulin resistance is of course tightly linked to PCOS, for example, which is going to be linked to infertility and fertility issues. But I can't really speak to too much of the science other than the fact that I know that they are associated. And when fertility outcomes, just because of the state of our body, just if we're in a metabolically unhealthy state, we just have higher levels of inflammation. So we're experiencing chronic inflammation. We're most likely insulin resistant, which is going to have an impact on our fertility organs. And it's just not a good state. Your body's not in a good state to carry a baby.
I think it was a lovely answer, because people can't ignore how much there is in your control as well. I mean, very intricacies of fertility and IVF, very different conversation. But as you spoke about, the exercise and nutritional element of that is it is vital. And I think that message is new to some as well. So I'm glad we touched on it. I think it probably was your sister in the video. I assume. I don't know.
Okay, that would make sense.
It might do. When it comes to mitochondria, what have you read in the research and actually practiced in your own life that you do specifically for mitochondrial function? That you're thinking about, okay, all these different ways I can optimize my mitochondria. How can we do that? How can the listener go in better optimize the mitochondria?
So when I think of mitochondria, I immediately think of muscle mitochondria, just because. So when it comes to our metabolic health too, of course we have different organs in the body that are going to adapt differently to different signals, or not different signals, but the way to activate those signals might be different. And when it comes to our muscle, I am convinced that the only physiological state that we can tell our muscles to adapt to is exercise. So there's a difference between decreasing energy intake, which is, so if we're thinking about putting our body in a depleted state, we could think of that as oh, okay, I'm just going to fast and then I'm going to increase energetic stress that way. However, when it comes to our muscles, we actually have to increase energy demand. We can't just decrease energy intake, because our muscles are completely happy running on fat. They're never experiencing that energy stress if we're just decreasing energy intake. So fasting, caloric restriction, etc. However, our muscles will experience energetic stress if we increase energy demand. So there's a difference there. And that's different from how we think about maintaining body weight or changing body weight. Is we can either decrease energy intake or we can increase energy expenditure. But when it comes to energetic stress, our muscles are different. And I say that organ differential, and bring up the differential organs just because I don't know what's going on in the liver. I don't know what's going on in the brain. Maybe fasting is promoting something, some sort of adaptation in the liver that promotes mitochondrial health in the liver. However, our metabolic health is very dictated by our muscle, because our muscle is our biggest metabolic organ. So if we're trying to optimize mitochondria, or if we're trying to optimize metabolic health, we're going to want to focus on the mitochondria of our skeletal muscle specifically, which means, bringing back my previous ramble there, that we need to exercise. Like, we need to tell our body to adapt, and that's how I started this conversation. And so in order to promote those adaptations, we have to increase energy expenditure, we have to increase energy demand, and the only way to do that is through exercise. And that's why I'm kind of perplexed by the zone 2 stuff, because I kind of lump zone 2 into like the fasting category. It's like, well, you're just burning more fat, and that sounds good, I guess, but because everyone wants to burn fat. But when it comes to mitochondrial adaptations, I really think of like, okay, how do we stress the cells as much as possible? Because that stress is gonna tell our bodies to adapt. So if I'm personally, that's why I'm like, I lean towards higher intensities. That's why I deliberately try and work hard every single workout, and I prioritize intensity. And I don't ever purposely try to work out at a lower intensity. And I don't think you can promote adaptations in mitochondria without exercise.
Love it. Beautiful answer. Do you ever feel there's a place for zone 2 in your week?
No.
I'm honestly, I love that you're way smarter than me, and you delved into research. I don't have time to go on a 4-hour rucking hike. You know, I don't know who. I can't fit that in my schedule. So 20-minute high intensity or half an hour, that suits me down to the ground. So my bias is I want to believe I can get all my metabolic demands for high intensity exercise. But there's always this other side which I'm trying to way up. I mean, we've had an exercise physiologist on it just talking about zone 2 and compelling. But I'm pleased you went into the mechanism, because it made sense with mitochondrial demand. You have to exceed it to cause the adaptation. So I'm pleased you went into the mechanism there.
Well, and like, we also know that VO2 max is associated with higher mitochondrial content, higher mitochondrial function, capacity, whatever word you want to give it. And VO2 max is going to increase with increased intensity. And then we have literature showing even greater glucose outcomes, glycemic control outcomes in individuals who start at a poor baseline health. And we can improve their glucose tolerance by if they get randomized into the high intensity group, we see better outcomes than in the moderate intensity continuous training group. And then also, what's really interesting is that we can reduce the amount of people. So some people don't get improvements in VO2 max with exercise training protocols in the literature. But if they're working out at higher intensities, we reduce non-responders. So, I mean, that is pretty compelling to say that, and maybe there's a superiority for high intensity exercise if we're trying to promote greater cardio respiratory fitness, which is again, one of the strongest predictors of mortality.
Very clear, very clear. I always know it's a good I want to go out and do the thing the person I'm speaking to is doing, and I want to go slightly hill near me, and I want to do hill sprints and feel good and get my mitochondria in check. Right? It's good. When it comes to I guess health protocols and different diets and different things you can do, whether it be a red light or cold therapy or this diet or that diet, there's so much noise. And one of my favorite questions to ask people like yourself is, if you were to go long, something that you feel is underutilized and you think will be all the rage in 10 years' time, or still be all the rage in 10 years' time, maybe intensity exercise, I don't know. And if you were to go short something you think is maybe overblown and the research doesn't quite correlate with the hype, what would you go long, protocols wise or interventions wise or diet wise, health, whatever, and what would you go short?
Yeah, long, high intensity exercise. Just exercise in general. Honestly, I mean, I've been really pushing the high intensity, which I think should, like, I think if we can prioritize high intensity, then do it. But like any exercise, most people just don't exercise enough. So if okay, this is where I could buy into zone 2. If you go from nothing to zone 2, kudos. I'm really proud of you. If you are subbing in your high intensity exercise for more zone 2 because someone has convinced you that you need to do zone 2 for your mitochondria and for improving fat oxidative capacity, that's where I have an issue. Is because I could be potentially doing a disservice if I bought into the zone 2, because now I'm giving up my high intensity exercise for something lower intensity that could be promoting less adaptation. So long, prioritize intensity, exercise as much as, be as active as you can. Of course, this is speaking to just general population. This is not an athlete. I just want people to move their bodies, get steps in each day, not sit for 8-10 hours a day. Long, yeah, exercise. Exercise is the best thing we can all do. Short, zone 2. I'm kidding. I mean, a lot of things are hyped on social. Honestly, I haven't really been staying up with the social media trends these days. And it's funny because I do everything. Like, I have the Juve here by my desk. I do red light therapy. I do have a cold plunge. I sauna.
Well, I mean, wonderful. As do we, but tell us why why do the cold? Like, what bit of science brought you in on it?
I do the cold because I like to do hard things, and regardless of whatever the science is, which isn't strong, I don't think. Mind you, I'm not like staying up to date too much or reading too much into it. I just feel good after I do a cold plunge. Subjectively, I like it. It's something hard. It challenges me. It's something you can do quickly that makes me uncomfortable, and I definitely am attracted to discomfort. and yeah, like it reminds me that I can do hard things. So I like the cold plunge. It also feels amazing when you get out of a 180-degree sauna and you get to go straight into a cold plunge, or after a workout you get to jump into a cold plunge. Like, I just like it. The sauna is also an amazing subjective thing that I just really enjoy, and not something I'm like, oh, I read this paper so I bought a sauna. It's just something that, like, it's a time in my day where I'm not with my phone, I'm not with technology, I'm with my thoughts. I think there's a lot of benefits to the sauna that extend beyond just increasing your core body temperature and your heart rate, and perhaps there's cardiovascular benefits from it. And I'm convinced that the sauna is doing something good. I don't think it's doing something bad. But whether or not I'm like, this is the best thing for health, I would never say that. So yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know where I'm going with this, other than I'm not really convinced much of most things beyond just a nutritious diet and exercise.
It's fun. Have you seen the?
And we can talk about diet too.
Well, let's go diet. Actually, let's do that, because everyone has such strong extremes on diet, and usually it's quite simple. Yeah. What are your views on diet?
Right.
Metabolism.
I didn't listen to the episode with Tommy. But if you guys talk about nutrition at all, then I would assume that everything he said is what I would just regurgitate, because he's been probably one of the strongest influences on my own dietary.
It's funny, we actually don't diet that much. We went hard on exercise with regards to, I guess, cognitive function, and warding off cognitive decline. But diet specifically, we didn't usually go into that much. We did off, right? But...
Okay, well, I've started like way up in the clouds with just trying every single diet. I've done vegan long term, I've done paleo long term, I've done a fruitarian diet for a stint. I've done too many diets. Always not, never had to do with like body stuff. It was always just like, I want to be the healthiest ever. And when I was 16, obviously I was going to go vegan as a 16-year-old girl. And so yes, I've had a lot of experience, and I'm one of those people that's like, oh, if I'm doing this, I'm doing it 100%.
Yeah.
So but like the more I learn about metabolism, physiology, nutrition, like you said, it does come back to just the basics. It just comes back to very simple. I found a place where I don't even think about what I eat. Like I do eat whole foods pretty much, like probably 90 to 100% of the time. I don't bring much processed foods or packaged foods into my house. I eat a lot of meat and vegetables. I eat some fruit. My carbohydrates pretty much just come from, I don't know, the occasional starchy veg or some fruit. And I do just keep it very simple. So I'm not tracking anything. I don't count macros. I don't care about how many carbs I'm eating. I have now ventured into sourdough bread because the master's student that I work with bakes his own sourdough bread. And this was like the first time I've eaten bread in years. So I don't really eat many grains. And because I want to see the ingredient, like whatever that food existed in nature is what it kind of looks like on my plate most of the time. So I people joke about like how people who eat whole foods, like we're just eating ingredients. We're not actually eating meals, we're just eating ingredients, which I think is hilarious, but I think it's how we should eat. So there's no ingredient list on my foods. And so I do prioritize protein because I think that that's really important for just managing appetite, satiety, and then of course body composition and supporting adaptations. So increasing muscle protein synthesis after my workouts. But I keep it very simple. There's no stress around food. I just try and prioritize whole foods and prioritize proteins. And that's it. Like those are the two things that I really, really keep at top of mind. And beyond that, I'm not concerned with macros, calories, etc. Yeah.
There's something I love the midwit meat. I don't know if you've seen it, where it's a meme where you have the fool at the bottom doing something very simple, and then this guy in the middle doing everything complex and, you know, measuring things to the nearest gram, all this kind of stuff, and everything. And then the expert at the end doing the same thing as the simple guy at the beginning. And yeah, I feel
Right.
more simplicity, less being complex with various different. I mean, even with I was very strict keto for about 3 years. And it's great, but really hard to. It's not conducive to a social life, and this and 30 grams of carbs you're just terrified of because it'll kick you out of ketosis and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, love that message of single ingredient. Some little quick fire questions to finish, if I may.
Yeah.
I always like these ones. What are your favorite books that have shaped your worldview, or have you read anything cool recently, or you know, anything, everything could be. Fiction, could be non-fiction, whatever you got.
Right now, I'm completing Right Thing Right Now by Ryan Holiday, and it's so good. I haven't finished it yet, and I'm already re-listening to chapters. So I commute to school, so I listen to some audiobook when I'm sick of podcasts. Sorry. And I highly recommend this book. It's really great. It's just a good, like, how to just be a good human in society and stick to your values, especially as a scientist and someone who wants to work in science communication. I think it's really important to understand, like, what are your values? Don't be a sellout. So it applies to my career, but also just being a good human and caring for other people, not doing things for necessarily recognition, etc. So I really like that book. So good timing of asking me that question, even though I'm not finished, but so far so good.
That series is wonderful so far. I ordered that the other day. It's coming, and yeah, he's wonderful. I think he's
good.
Spelling or digesting sort of old ancient stoicism into like the modern world and what it means. I think he does important work. When it comes to your research and your work, if you could wave a magic wand and know something that isn't currently known about the research, or even it could be wave a magic wand to find out a new direction and you'd like to find out in this time about where the research is going, what would you like to find out? Or explore further?
I would love, honestly, we probably already have this research, I just haven't synthesized it. But this is just also top of mind right now, so this could just be the response to you asking this on this specific day. But women being feared away from fasted exercise, I do not understand where this argument is coming from based on the literature. Again, this is another like, oh, it makes sense as a story. Like, oh, you're fasted, you're now increasing cortisol through exercise, and you're going to cause chronic stress, and your hormones are going to tank, and yada, yada, yada. I would love to see a paper that says that, because I have not found any evidence for this. So all the messaging around like female health and exercise and fasting, there's no scientific basis for it. So I'm not sure where people are getting this other than convincing themselves that it makes for a cool physiological story that has not been proven. Unless someone can send me a paper, then I'm happy to change my mind. But with regard to like, yeah, I guess there's a lot of things that I would like to demystify through my science, and past exercise with females is one of them. Zone 2, clarifying just the literature on Zone 2 exercise, and all the claims made on social media. I'd love for that to be clarified as well. And then like my own research, like my actual intervention research, seeing if adaptations to fasted high intensity exercise are different than the carbohydrate fed state. So that's what my one study is looking at. And then I would love for there to be, like I said at the beginning, so this is in collaboration with Dr. Andy Galpin and Dr. Tommy Wood, having a biomarker for muscle quality, an EC non-invasive biomarker for muscle quality, which is going to happen, which is very exciting. So that I know it's going to be something that we all are very proud of, and something that I'm super honored to be contributing to. So having that is going to be really important. And I think that that actually has the most, I guess, clinical application, because it's something that we can assess over time and dictate it. And when it comes to like, what are our biomarkers we can track to measure our metabolic health? Well, our muscle quality is a direct reflection of our metabolic health. So, or vice versa, our metabolic health is a direct reflection of our muscle quality. So if we have that biomarker, then that is something we can track. And that's really exciting for me, because it's useful. On a population level, people can take that research and use it in their own life. And so I'm excited that my research is going to be contributing to that. And then on a side project of that is using lactate as this marker of mitochondrial capacity, function, content. I think that is proposed within the literature and again on social media, that we can use lactate levels during exercise to assess our mitochondrial function. But whether that's been actually confirmed through a scientific study hasn't been done. And I hope that I can confirm that, because that would be really cool too from a clinical aspect, is being able to assess our mitochondrial function through a simple blood prick and just measuring, doing 5-minute exercise, a 5-minute bout on a bike, measuring blood lactate, and being able to determine if that is associated with our mitochondrial function, because again, that should be a big dictator of our metabolic health and something that we're trying to optimize for everything, living long, healthy life.
Well, what will we have to?
That was like 10 answers for one question.
It's lovely to see people excited about what they're doing, right? It's the excitement and it's lovely. Last one before we shoot: is there an idea or a quote that you live your life by? You're clearly full of energy and you do what you're passionate about.
Live my life by. You know, I was listening to Jordan Jonas on Lex Friedman today, and he said, "Say yes to life," and that really stuck with me. Again, all of these answers are just like the timing of you asking me, but saying yes to life, like I do think about like what I live my life by is my deathbed analogy. I always think about this is like, on my deathbed, am I going to regret this or that? And am I going to regret missing out on that opportunity, or is this worth it, etc. So I think of my deathbed analogy a lot, and saying yes to life, I think, reduces the amounts of regrets I'm going to have laying on my deathbed. And I want to experience everything, and I want to make an impact somehow. And I have a note, it's hanging up in front of me, that I wrote in 10th grade. It's dated, and it says, make a difference. We had to write down our goal, our biggest goal. And I was like a leadership class, and I still have this note, which is crazy. And it says, make a difference or discovery in the health industry. And so I really still align with that goal that I wrote in high school, which is really cool. And I keep that in front of me every day. And that is what I want to do. So I hope that I can make an impact and better the world. And I think that, I guess, that living like the way I live, like saying yes to life, doesn't really have anything to do with that. But at the same time, like, that is kind of aligning with just like taking as many opportunities as I can, putting my best foot forward, and hoping just that by doing that, I'm going to end up inevitably where I'm meant to be without necessarily knowing where I'm meant to be.
What a lovely answer. I mean, no doubt, right? You're going to go on to do good things. And I think the key next steps is to keep up with what you're up to. And, as and when there's the greatest discovery, and we can get you back on and talk about it. I mean, that muscle biomarker, or muscle quality biomarker, is super interesting. And we'd love to chat as and when. In that vein, where can people keep up with you?
Yeah, I guess I'm the most active on Instagram. And by most active, I mean, I'm just moderately active on Instagram. But that's Kristi Storoschuk, just my name, full name. But you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, etc. Just search Kristi Storoschuk. There's not many of us. I don't think there is any of them, other than me. I think I'm the only.
The only. Love it. Well, Kristi, thank you so much for coming on. It's a real privilege to talk to you. That was really fun.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Great.